Hi, my name is Dustin Reed. I was in the Joplin May 22nd tornado, F5 that hit our city, and I'm going to be telling a little bit about what happened.
Dustin, tell me a little bit about your day before the tornado warnings.
Before the tornado, I was kind of hanging around in the apartment. I was playing a few video games, watching a few movies. My roommate, Cody, she worked at the apartment complex and was down at the clubhouse. They had a birthday party / kind of graduation going on, so there were people down there. She wasn't feeling well, but she couldn't leave, so we went and hung down there for a little while in the office while people were outside. And then when she was finally able to get off, we came back to the apartment, hung out a little bit there, watched some movies before we heard the first siren go off.
What did you do when you heard the warnings?
When we heard them, at first we were kind of like, oh, there's a siren, weather looked okay. It was cloudy, but for the most part, it was fine, and, we hear sirens anytime there's a storm, it's usual. So we heard the sirens, and we called the manager to ask where there was a safe place in the apartment complex to go, and she thought it would be okay to go to the clubhouse and go into the bathrooms.
So you were in the bathrooms after the warning sounded. So where were you, and then what did you do when you realized a tornado was coming at you?
When we went down to the clubhouse, for the most part, everyone was inside, but I went outside, just kind of watch it roll in. I like to watch the weather whenever it's supposed to be bad. When my roommate came out, she told me that they had reports of a tornado at Black Cat and 20th. And since we were on 20th, down the road, well, quite a ways down the road, but we were on 20th. So I became a little worried, but I still didn't think anything of it, and we went inside. I still didn't go into the bathrooms at this point. I kind of hung out in a little lobby area near the bathrooms, helping people, telling them where we were at when they came in, if they wanted to take shelter. And then when things started to feel like they were actually getting bad, it was just getting crazy outside. We had a view of the pool through a whole wall of windows, and the water just was not waving, not splashing naturally. It's like it was parting in the middles and coming together and then moving in odd ways. And that's when I started feeling really uncomfortable, and we finally did The Last of Us go into the bathroom.
So describe what it was like when the tornado actually hit.
When the tornado hit, it was kind of, without a warning, because we were in the bathroom. We just heard the storm outside. I thought it was kind of like rolling thunder coming in. It was just constant. And our ears popped. And, living in this area, everyone kind of has some tornado knowledge about the pressure when a tornado goes through. So I told everyone, it's like, oh, it's fine. It's just our ears popping. There was a tornado, so it's probably, somewhere near here. And then we started hearing the glass shatter, that whole wall of windows. So we all kind of went to the ground. We started hearing more and more crunching noises, more noises that sounded like things we couldn't really describe, like metal, but not any type of natural sound to the metal. Not like when you hit it, like twisting, things that you wouldn't hear unless in a metallurgy kind of place, I think. And then the first time I knew something really bad was about to happen, a gust of wind hit, and the room around us lifted for a moment and kind of sat back down. And then that second gust took the whole room away from us. Essentially, because at first the door had kind of opened, so I grabbed the door handle and held it shut, and it was that second gust, because we felt the whole room kind of lift, and a little bit of light came in. Very little light though, but it was enough that the room kind of seemed to, we could see down low, but not anything at the top of the room. And then that second gust, I was still holding on, it started to lift the room, and I was holding on thinking oh, I can just hold on to this, and then once my whole arm was extended, I let go. And then at that point, I kind of went forward, so a wall hit us, a section of wall hit us and landed on top of us as the tornado went through. As it continued, I kept my eyes open during most of it. It looked kind of grayscale, monotone, things going by. I had a lot of stuff in my head just trying to comprehend what was going on, because the entire wall had lifted and then something had hit us that we couldn't see at that time. I had thought the entire clubhouse had lifted and we were under it, and it was being lifted by the wind, because I just couldn't comprehend what was going on. So my mind was coming up with, I guess, what seemed like the most logical explanation, and I was terrified that when the wind stopped, the whole building was just going to set down on top of us. Once it was over, I noticed I couldn't really move. I was down on all fours. It was really hard to move because I was pinned on my waist down to my knees, like directly up and down. If I tried to go back, there was no give, and if I tried to lean forward, there was no give, and I could feel something scratching into my back. Near me, there was 2 girls, and then the toilet at the very end of the bathroom, and the wall section was literally setting on top of me and on top of the toilet, and that was the main reason I couldn't move. The other end was just setting on the pile of debris, but it was me and the toilet bracing it at the other end. So there was these girls in between me and the toilet, and then right at the toilet was my roommate Cody, I found out later. In front of me there was he was about 20-something, maybe a little younger. He had come in with those girls, and he had been at the other side of the room, but now he was directly in front of me laying down, because we had this wall section on us, and we weren't really sure what had happened, what the state of the building was in, other than we were under some amount of debris. People were screaming, people were yelling. I don't know if what kind of instincts kicked in, but I told everyone to shut up. I yelled it as loud as I could, and people kind of quieted down. The girls near me were still terrified and crying, but not everyone wasn't talking now. I said, if you can move and it won't hurt anyone or shift the debris, move if you can see a section of light to get out. And so a couple people, the gentleman in front of me, he started crawling along because there was a ray of light off to our right, like just a section where it looked like something was open. So he crawled over to that, and a few other people started moving that could. The girls could move, but one of the girls was afraid because she couldn't feel her legs, and she was afraid they were broken. If she did anything, it would mess them up. So once everyone was out of the way, I decided to see if I could shift at all or move. And I really couldn't. Anytime I tried to, the wall section would move. I got a little bit lower, but it ended up taking the guys who had already gone out, coming down to my end and lifting it for me to get completely out, but I still ended up, and it was the scratching sensation I mentioned earlier. There was a nail there that ended up cutting down my back until I finally got out of that position, was able to army crawl the rest of the way, and then they kind of let it rest, not on the ground because it was too low, but once it came down to about a foot or 2 off the ground is where the wall and where I was at finally did stop going downward. The girls stayed there. I crawled the rest of the way out. I came up, and I immediately saw my other roommate, Wooly. He looked kind of dazed, so we ended up, starting to try to figure out what was going on and finding Cody, and then we helped the other people out by lifting the section of the wall.
So after you guys got out from underneath the debris, tell me what happened from that point up until you left the apartment complex.
Up until that point, the first thing was essentially trying to get everyone out of this debris. Our bathroom, literally, there was nothing other than that wall over it that had hit us and then, protected us from the rest of the storm by falling literally over us. We got that lifted, got those 2 girls moved, found out Cody couldn't feel her arm, found out it was broken. We found out much later it was broken, but we had a good idea based on the way it, kind of bent unnaturally whenever we tried to lift her up. What we ended up doing was there was a man who had just come out of his apartment. It had pulled the entire section, the sliding doors to his patio out, and had ripped out his entire railing. So literally you could just walk in through the side here. He said he had couches in there, he had some areas that we could take people, and it was right nearby. We put down a piece of plywood over an area that had bent up the fence, it kind of sheared it, and we used that to walk over it. We took those who were injured from the first section of the bathroom over, and then we came back because the other bathroom, the adjacent bathroom, seems to be where most of the debris started to pile up before it went into the larger pile. We had to lift another section of wall. There was one man who was buried up to his torso in the debris, had lots of cuts on his face, I assume mainly because he had been out in the storm for a portion of it, since he had been buried up to here. What we ended up doing was we dug him out, found everyone, asked anyone who was coherent, was there anyone else in the bathroom, did a head count. We were able to get everyone out of those areas that we knew were in the clubhouse. At this point, I was injured but not badly, and I didn't really realize the extent of the injuries till later. But I was standing there, everyone, my 2 roommates, anyone who was injured had went inside that room, and there was 4 or 5 of us who kind of stayed out in that pile of debris, just kind of looking to see if we saw anybody who maybe didn't get accounted for, who had just gotten into the clubhouse. And that's when I kind of looked out towards where the storm had come from, where the tornado had been heading towards us. And I have a building on my left, a building on my right, and a building behind me, so my vision is funneled in the path of the storm. And all I can see is just destruction. Everything looks messed up. I can see buildings I never used to be able to see. The hospital, you could see just barely the top of it, way off in the distance, and I was never able to see the hospital from there. What we ended up doing was we kind of collected ourselves. We sat for a moment, just kind of comprehending everything, and at that point someone pointed out my shirt that I was wearing, because I had, put on one of my casual shirts. It said, "I have issues." And we all kind of laughed about that, because at that moment, you either laugh or you cry. To comprehend, you have to try to adjust. And we kind of laughed about that. I told them I swear I didn't plan this or anything. Then we started hearing more people yelling. They all kind of split off into different directions. I went to check on my roommates. Cody, obviously very shaken. She was just holding her arm, staring down, and Wooly was kind of looking around but not saying much. I told them I was going to go see what I could do. The gentleman whose apartment he was letting us take all the injured people to let me use a pair of shoes, because one of my shoes had gotten lost in the clubhouse when I had crawled out. I took those shoes, put them on, and I started going through anyone who looked injured, who I could see blood on them, or said they needed help. I told them to go check right by the clubhouse. There was a lot of people milling around outside. They would see it, and to go there if they needed medical attention, or go there to see if there's anyone that could help them. I was looking for the apartment mainly first, to see if our apartment was even still there. All the buildings, the first and second floors were mostly fine. As you went up, the damage got worse. Some of the second floors had, sections of wall missing or caved in. At least 3 of the buildings had just sheared off the 3rd floor. The others seemed to have still sections of it. A couple of them had at least a piece of roof. But for the most part, the 3rd floors had just taken all the damage. When I got to our apartment, I couldn't get up the stairwell because we lived on the 2nd floor. I could immediately see that a section of my wall from my room was gone. I could also see that our 3rd floor just seemed to be like cut halfway through. I could see, stuff hanging down, just see, parts of walls. I could see that my car had been moved over several spaces and had been beaten up, and that an air conditioning unit had fallen on top of my roommate's car. I kind of took in the damage, and then someone asked me from the 1st floor if, what was going on. I just kind of looked over, and here they were kind of looking through their window, and they asked what happened. And I was like, well, a tornado came through, and they asked if it was bad, and I'm like, it's pretty bad. I mean, there's destruction everywhere you look. And they were like, okay, well, do you think we should stay here? And I told them I didn't know, simply because of how bad the building looked from the outside. They may want to stay in the area, definitely, if they're expecting anyone, or if they want to help, or if they just want to protect their stuff. But they may not want to be in the building, just because I didn't know the structural soundness of it at the time. So I ended up, walking a little bit farther, told a couple more people about where we were taking injured, and then I walked back, because I knew we needed to either get out of there, seek medical attention, or do something. We couldn't just wait, because there was going to be too many lines, too much. I knew people were going to start coming into the area, so we needed to get out while it was still easier. A gentleman was coming to look for his friend who lived in our nearby complex. He came looking in our injured area where we were taking people to see if his friend was there. He didn't find him at first. We asked him how he got here. He said that pretty much 2 to 3 blocks from us, literally things were mostly fine. Shingles off, one garage had caved in, but literally the destruction just seemed to stop. Just minor wind damage. And he had taken that route on Rex Avenue to get to our apartment complex to check on his friend. He said that if we let him go check on his friend, if he could find everything was okay, he'd help us out if he was able to. He showed us where his car was. We waited there for him. He found his friend. We all kind of talked for a little bit. His friend was going to wait because he had a few more friends who were in the storm but were fine and making their way to him. And then once they were all together, they were all going to head out. So while they were waiting, the gentleman who we found went on ahead and took us. First, we went to the mall to check on Kayla, who is my girlfriend. We went to go check on her. She wasn't there. They had closed down the mall already. From there, we went over to the college to check for a triage center, or to check for, and I went to go check for Kayla. Found Kayla. There was no triage center there yet. We had heard there was, which is why we checked for it. Once we found everyone in the big group, he went on ahead and went back to his friends, and we took Kayla's car over to my brother's.
So after you came here, what happened with the rest of your evening?
Okay. Once we got here, we kind of took a moment, we sat, we were trying to find out what we needed to do. Melissa told us to try urgent care in Webb City. When we got there, urgent care had already shut down for the night, which they had shut down before the tornado, I think, had even occurred, or right around it without knowing what was going on, because, at first you don't really know what's happening. So what we did is we went to Memorial Hall because we had heard from Melissa while in the car that they did have people going there, that there was stuff set up there to help people. On the way there, we thought about a couple of our friends who we knew lived in the storm path, and we still weren't sure about the degree or scope of how much was damaged. We knew there was a large area, but we didn't know how big that area was around the edges, if it was more blocks this way, if it was less blocks. There was two friends mainly we were worried about, my friend Steve and our friend Brittany. Brittany, we didn't know where she lived, so we couldn't really do too much there. She had just gotten a new apartment, we didn't know the address or exactly where it was. Steve, we did know where he was. So Kayla and I decided after we dropped off Cody and Wooly that we were going to try and find Steve to see if he was okay and if he knew anything. We were able to get kind of far up. I think it was about 17th Street is where we turned up and started going up that direction. It was a long wait going up that road because there were so many people already starting to flood in. People with chainsaws going around this way, people, lost and confused looks on their faces trying to figure out what was going on, what they should do. Kayla and I eventually parked. I'm not sure whereabouts we did, but it was just off 17th on 18th because we went one block in, immediately crested a hill, knew we weren't getting any farther just based on what we were seeing, all the damage, all the downed trees, houses in the middle of the road, or sections of houses. So we parked and started making our way up towards Rangeline because then we know we could just cut straight along Rangeline to 20th, go a little bit down 20th to, I believe it was, Texas Avenue, and then just walk the next couple blocks to Steve's. We ended up walking, I think, about 10 to 12 blocks up to Rangeline. Maybe not that many, maybe about. I'm not exactly sure. I wasn't counting. And we were just kind of taking in everything. I mean, we were still on the edge at that point. We could see, houses that were somewhat messed up, houses that, had roof damage. But then as we got to Rangeline and started cutting in into the actual path, we could just see things were gone. The storefronts were gutted, destroyed, mangled. And then when we started going down 20th was really when we got our big look because there was just level land where there had been tons of buildings, tons of trees, and it was just trying to take it all in. At that point, I had one of those little headlamps that my roommate Wooly had let me take, and I had attached it to my hand, and I was kind of shining light to make sure we didn't step on any power cables. We figured that for the most part the power cables were dead at this point because they were already cut somewhere else by the storm, but we still didn't want to take any chances, so we were shining the light on the ground, finding where the cables were so we could step over them, and just so mainly we didn't trip over debris. When we got to Steve's, his building was pretty much fine. It looked like he had a broken window on the upper floor. Kayla had a key because her and Cody had been going there to study in the evenings because Steve had his job and there would be no one there and they could study quietly. So we went on ahead into the apartment. We found a bowl of soup that looked like it's been started on at his desk, but it was just sitting there untouched. Half drank glass of water and nothing else. We figured because we saw his car there in the lot and we saw that it looked like he'd been eating that he had been there and then had left after the storm, which we assumed that, and that gave us a little bit of it made us feel better that he was probably okay. We ended up hearing about him later and he had left right after the storm and went to go check on his aunt, and they were fine as well. So once we found out there at Steve's that we didn't find him, but we figured based on what we were seeing that he was okay, we made our way back. Once we got back, we found the car. I had thought we were one street over, so I started freaking out that someone had taken it. Kayla was like, no, we were over by this area, so we did find the car, and we went to Kayla's dorm room at the college. This was where we posted the first Facebook status really that, it's like I'm okay for anyone who hadn't heard from my mom or other relatives at that point. And we were talking to a few people. My brother had asked me if I wanted to go to the hospital with them because they were going to an out-of-town hospital because our hospitals were either gone or very overflowing. So what we ended up doing was talking to a few other friends and my friend Jess, who is training to be a nurse, has a lot of medical skills, offered us to stay in her basement for as long as I needed to and for as long as Kayla wanted to. We went over there, and Jess immediately, got her first aid kit, started working on my back, started, taking out little bits of rocks that were embedded in my cuts in my lower waist, patching up areas that were cut open, putting on all that stingy antibiotic stuff. And then we just kind of chilled out there for the rest of the night, just comprehending, trying to find out what we could, trying to get information on as many people as we could find out that we didn't know about yet.
Did you personally know anybody that died in the storm?
I did not. The only person I had at least met once was the teacher, I believe Alvarez, over at the university. I had met him once just in passing, talking to a friend of mine who knew him. They had stopped for a moment, had chatted, and I just kind of waited there listening to the conversation. And then that was the only time I'd ever met him. I didn't know anyone else.
So what did you lose, and what were you able to save?
I lost a lot of my larger items. My bed was just soaking wet when we finally got to it. My couch slash kind of futon, same thing, was just wet. We knew it wouldn't be salvageable. Surprisingly, because when we got into the apartment, you could tell it looked like just, someone had went in with one of those leaf blowers and just went crazy on everything. One of the bookshelves had been on one side of the room, had literally been lifted and just dumped out and thrown in the center. The room was crazy, but one of the weird things about it was right by the windows that had gotten blown out in the living room, the walkout balcony with the little sliding doors had been gutted, pulled out, but for some reason my desk was just perfectly fine, loose papers that hadn't even moved. With just any, just blowing on them, just normal, would cause them, to shift, and all this wind had gone through and the papers were fine. My desk, my computer was a little dirty. I was able to clean that, clean out the inside, able to get it working, so it was salvaged. My desk was salvaged. My video rockers, the couch, the TV that I had in my room, I don't recall that we actually got it out. I don't think it would have worked. It looked like it was kind of messed up. It may have. And then the TV that was mine in the living room had a few kind of pings in it. But it did look like it might be okay, so we took it. We took my little home entertainment center there that it was setting on. A lot of the silverware, a lot of the pots and pans we were able to get out. Lots of kind of little things as well. Books. My bookshelf had been okay. Things had been kind of pulled out of it and messed up, but things that were in the bookshelf were alright. I mainly lost larger items. Lots of my little items I was able to recover, but for the most part I'm still finding out, even within this last week, finding out there's discs I don't have anymore. Or little things that I go to look for and realize, oh, I guess I didn't get them out. So I'm still kind of finding out things I didn't save that just were either left or were missing completely. But I do kind of feel like I didn't lose too much, but I did lose a large amount since I didn't have much. Oh, my vehicle. My vehicle was definitely totaled. They were kind of able to drive it up on the lift, but it was going to cost too much to repair it than it was to just buy a new vehicle, was my understanding. So I did lose my vehicle, but I was able to get a new one later on.
So after all of that, what have you learned? What do you do differently now?
Now I check the weather. My girlfriend has always checked the weather, and even more so now after the tornado that went through. I'll check with her if I don't have it readily available to get on the internet and look at the Torcon or look at the weather possibilities. The Torcon is a tornado index. It allows you to look at the predicted scale of a tornado. I'm fairly positive from what my understanding is that the day we had our tornado we were a 9 or a 10 for our area. As the scale goes up, it doesn't mean it's going to be a bad tornado, but as the number gets higher, it means more than likely higher and higher chance to have a tornado. So you could be a 10 and have a little tiny, F1 come through that barely hurts anything. Or in our case, you can have a 9 or 10, and have the F5 that comes through. The higher number doesn't denote damage or how worse it's going to be. It's just possibility. But we checked that Torcon. 2 or a 3 is kind of average. Typically doesn't happen. And so 2 or 3 is kind of an okay number. You definitely don't want to be on there at all. If you don't have a number on the Torcon for your area, then you should feel safe, but it doesn't mean not going to happen. It could still potentially happen. But that Torcon's very helpful. Check NOAA, look at all their things. They're very good about their predicting, their tracking. I look at the Weather Channel, mainly when there's a storm either coming or when I see that it's bad weather, then I'll go check and I'll kind of keep track till it's passed over. Mainly during the bad times, during spring, during the tornado season I do, and during the fall I did last year. Over the summer, I know the storms aren't going to be that bad. I'll kind of check the weather, but I'm much more relaxed during the winter and then during the summer, because those are more steady temperatures, not a lot of fluctuation that causes the tornadic storms.
What will you do the next time you know there's tornado warning in the area?
Anytime we've had a tornado warning, we've been going directly to where I live right now. We have a bank safe on the first floor that we go and we just kind of set in, check the weather through the wireless network in our apartment building. When we move here in a couple weeks, we're going to have an actual tornado shelter that's underground. So if we have a warning, we'll be in that area, ready to go into it if we need to be in there.
That's it.
All right.
Anything you would like to add?
It was an experience.